who sent an apology, and therefore we shall not be with her. Although the paper, as indicated, was supposed to be presented by two people, Mimi and Dr. Karungi Mafumbo, who was not informed about it. Therefore, she's not also ready and will not be part. The second, but of course, that one was supposed to be talking about issues of identity and citizenship of the Banyarwanda in Uganda. And this was to be with particular reference to a reflection on the decolonization process in the Great Lakes region. The second one, who is online, is Abdul Mahajubo, who is to talk about, to tell us something to do with identity at crossroads, and behind these issues to do with the Nubi quest for repatriation. So at what point did the Nubi want to get back to their said cradleland, which is Sudan? This is actually something to do with what you'll be telling us, and it has a component of ethnicity in there, component of identity. So it is identity politics, it is nationalism, it is ethnicity, and the like. But allow me congratulate Abdul Mahajub upon successfully completing his doctoral studies and graduating in May 2021, which is a few months ago. And the third person, who is none other than Muhuruzi Mary Kajumba, who is also a PhD student from Makerere Institute of Social Research, also under CUSE. And she'll be telling us something to do with the uses and abuses of history, and with particular reference to how Uganda's historiography affected Bunyoro's development. Positively or negatively, she will be actually telling us, which is a good entry point into the historiography of Uganda. Be very happy to listen to this. The fourth person is Mr. Tunanuchi Nicholas, who is a PhD student in the Department of History, Archaeology, and Heritage Studies, and he will be telling us about the contested citizenship with particular reference to the Bafuruchi in Kibale district since the 1990s. And the last person would be Patience Akampurira, who unfortunately we have not heard from her ever since she lost the dad. Could be she's still in the village. So far we have three people, and we shall follow the order. Our first presenter then is going to be none other than Abdul Mahajub. You are welcome, Abdul Mahajub. You have 12 to 15 minutes, given that two of the parties will not be presenting. So you have between 10 to 15 minutes. Right. And the question and answer session will come at the end, or at the end of all your presentations.
All right. Thank you, everyone. It's really a great opportunity to be here and present my study on the Nubi in Uganda, but particularly I'll be looking at the Nubi's quest for repatriation under the title Identity at the Crossroads Behind the Nubi Quest for Repatriation. From the onset, I must state that this study is intended to give an in-depth examination into how the identity of the Nubi as a civilized, quote-unquote, ethnic group in the 1930s contributed towards their quest for repatriation back to Sudan in the mid-20th century. The motivation of this study, of course, stems from my PhD dissertation on identity, indigeneity, and contested citizenship, the Nubi ethnic minority in Uganda, where the Nubi demanded to be repatriated back to Sudan in the 1930s, after serving as British colonial soldiers. Now, that takes me to the key question. Who are the Uganda Nubi? The Uganda Nubi are an ethnic group that attaches its origin from the former Egyptian Sudanese soldiers who were able to maintain their religious ethnic identity and later acquired recognition as one of Uganda's indigenous communities in the 1995 constitution. However, the recent work by Mahajuku argues that there are some Nubi who actually trace their origin within the indigenous ethnic communities in Uganda, especially a group of the Nubi that got assimilated into the Nubi ethnic group. So this group or these Nubi claim their ancestry not from Sudan or the former Egyptian Sudanese soldiers, but rather within the indigenous ethnic groups in Uganda. The study, therefore, argues that right from the time they served as British colonial soldiers during the 19th century, the Nubi considered themselves as a civilized, quote unquote, ethnic group other than other indigenous groups within Uganda. But then you ask yourself, why did the Nubi construct that kind of identity of civility? They perceived, first of all, themselves as more or less the same like the Nubians of southern Egypt, who for many centuries were considered to be behind civilization, especially African civilization. So being part of the Egyptian Sudanese soldiers, and indeed, according to history, they were recruited by the Nubians, especially from northern Sudan and southern Egypt. They also took themselves to be a civilized group. Hence, they started to look at themselves as more of civilized than any other indigenous ethnic society. That's where they started from, taking the civility kind of identity. And by the way, you find that from that moment, they also constructed themselves, regardless from coming from a conglomeration of various ethnic society. They considered themselves also as Nubians of southern Egypt. Hence, they even took the name Nubians. So that also put them in a position where they regarded themselves as more civilized than others. Secondly, they perceived themselves again as more skilled in military, compared to other groups. Why? Because they took themselves to be slave soldiers, according to history of the 18th and 19th century in Egypt and Sudan. Also, they looked at themselves as good traders or excellent traders because they were behind the trade for ivory in the 18th and 19th century, ivory, gold, and silver in southern Equatoria. So they looked at themselves as a well-suited group or advanced group than others. They also looked at themselves as urban people, non-agriculturists, and at the same time, Orthodox Muslims. The British, however, and other indigenous ethnic communities contested the civilized, quote unquote, view or identity of the Nubi because they looked at themselves, they looked at the Nubi as almost the same with the other indigenous ethnic communities. And after the First World War, the Nubi decided that it was high time they be they are given a special status or recognition as former British colonial soldiers, but also as a civilized group. Now, this was again problematic. Why? Because as I argued earlier, that not all the people, especially the British and other indigenous communities, regarded the Nubi as a civilized group, however much for them they considered themselves as civilized. The British, of course, opposed to this idea, and they instead advocated or suggested that these Nubi should be integrated with other indigenous ethnic communities, because more years had passed and they could not go back to what they assumed to be their Crodalan back in Sudan. So what happened is that the Nubi objected to the integration plan. Why? They stated that they could not easily be mixed with uncivilized groups of people, and hence they demanded that instead of getting integrated with the other indigenous ethnic communities, they rather be repatriated back to Sudan. Of course, the British opposed to their demand of being repatriated. Why? Because they knew that actually these people, first of all, the authorities back in Sudan will not allow them because it was a long time. Secondly, they were scattered, I should use the word scattered, quote unquote, all over East Africa because they were employed to different places, you know, to quell resistances, those who were fighting the British colonial system. So in that way, they really advocated that the Nubi had no choice of going back, but rather to be integrated with other indigenous communities. Well, the Nubi decided to go to Sudan under the guise of attending a religious function, Maulid, and then see whether they can settle, they can be maybe welcomed back home. Unfortunately, when they went, the emissaries who went, around 114, were not well received. So they came back disappointed, and they started now to realize that the only option they had was not repatriation and getting a permanent settlement in their cradleland, as they assumed it, but rather to accept to be integrated. So this study actually develops that kind of narrative, that it was not only the issue of the Nubi finding a place to settle, but various reasons accounted for actually why the Nubi demanded for their repatriation back to Sudan. That was the main idea. And mainly, it was because of identity construction, how they perceived themselves, how they never wanted to be integrated, and how they looked at themselves as a more civilized group. The study actually was anchored mainly on oral histories and archival written materials, which I got from both national and regional archives. And this scholarship, if you try to look at it, it suits mainly, or it contributes mainly on the scholarship of identity construction, ethnicity, and nationalism. I don't know whether I'm still in the range of time, but Chair, I beg to submit.
Now 3 minutes.
Oh, 3 minutes. Well, I think I've presented even before time. So before the allocated time. I beg to submit. That is the study I wanted to share, and that is what actually this study is all about. Thank you so much.
That has been Dr. Abdul Mahajub, very fresh doctor in the field of history, and thanks for the presentation. You'll be hearing from us shortly after other members have presented.
My pleasure.
Next is Muhuruzi Mary Kajumba, who will be telling us about the historiography, something to do with the historiography of Uganda, with particular reference to how Buganda's position affected the development of Bunyoro. Muhuruza Mary, you are welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon. Yeah, I'll beg to put off my video because my network is not that very good, but I just wanted people to see my face and then attach the paper to a face. So kindly allow me put off my video. As already said, I'm Mary Muhuruz, and my presentation is about the uses and abuses of history and how Uganda's historiography affected Bunyoro's development. I'll begin by asking some questions that I seek answers to. Some of the questions will be answered within what I'll be saying, but others remain seeking for answers. First of all, can we have an independent history of Bunyoro? I keep asking myself that question. And then I also ask, can we have an integrated history of Uganda? And when does this begin, if we can have an integrated history of Uganda? And who are its proponents, of Uganda? Who are its proponents? Who does it include? And what kind of past does it articulate? I'm going to give a brief about what I have to say, especially about Bunyoro. Bunyoro has had and still has got violent outbursts among its population. There are ethnic tensions. These have risen in the region since the mid-90s or even before, because when we look at the Nyangere rebellion, that's when the violence, the violence started. But we've had these ethnic violence tensions more in the 1990s, rotating around land distribution, resource allocation, and political management. The claim over land rights and distribution have involved various groups such as the Bafuruchi, the Bachiga, Bagisu, Bafumbira, the Barao, and all these claim native entitlement to the land. These land tensions have been experienced in different districts like Kivale, Masindi, Hoiman, Bulisa, Mubende, Chivoga. And these cases of violence have especially been reported during the electoral periods, mostly, although even without that, they're always there, but mostly during the electoral periods. And we've had clashes mostly between the Banyoro and Bachiga. We have also heard about demands of the Banyoro on the share of, or on the return on oil, and the claim as having right on land. But while as we may neglect Bunyoro's demand on the return from oil and land, I'm not interested in the question of who should get or who should not, but I'm interested in knowing why this is becoming an important question now. So I keep asking myself, why is it becoming an important question now? Is it because of the long-term politics we see today? Or is it because of the political management of Bunyoro by the Ugandan state that has kept the region as a peripheral player in Uganda's progress due to the economic resources, such as land and minerals, that the state functionaries have tried to extract using primitive accumulation? Or is it because the contemporary political management of Bunyoro has learned from and in many ways reproduced the legacy of colonial state in its governance over Bunyoro? Why do I say this? For me, what I think it to be is, one, I think it is, I continuously think that the challenges we see in Bunyoro are linked to a particular political management. And this therefore means that the problem is perpetually a colonial legacy that has been reproduced by all successive governments since the colonial period. I say this because when you look at the strategies and tactics of governance, which are being applied by the contemporary state, these same strategies and tactics were applied by the colonial state when it sought to achieve various outcomes in different regions. For instance, the establishment of the political constituencies. When you go to Buyaga, Bugangais, you see there are constituencies that have been split. We have Buyaga West, Buyaga East, and these constituencies were split depending on the population that was there. Where there were more Banyoro, that became a constituency of Banyoro. Where there were more Bachiga, that became a constituency of the Bachiga. And the ring fencing of political positions, that has also been there. And to me, I see this as a creation of tribal-like homelands, which exacerbates even the violence in the region. And this is what happened in the colonial period. So this gave also, it supported the indirect rule and the divide and rule, since we all know that once power is centralized, or the centralized system, the state remains with the monopoly to do whatever or to legitimize everything. So I argue that these strategies and tactics of humbling political management persisted because they had been based on an intellectual history that debased Bunyoro society and leadership and placed justification for such treatment, because I've not given a history about what happened with Kabalega and how the Banyoro were treated. And for some of you who have read history, you've heard about that. Because of time, I can't go through all that history. So when we consider the various ways in which the state has historically managed different societies, it is evident that differences in political management have implications on what kind of social conflicts are allowed to manifest in different societies and persist to present to the present stage, where they become serious issues that produce social tension and violence. So looking back, the nature
Mary, are we still with you?
Yeah, I think I'm back. My network is not so good. Yeah. However, this issue of Bunyoro's underdevelopment has continuously been underplayed, noting that Bunyoro has benefited politically because it has history, the Minister of Bunyoro Affairs. And I know now that in 2021, Bunyoro has been given a prime minister. I know that will also be said that Bunyoro has benefited and the prime minister is there, but this doesn't help so very much. More so, I also say that the historiography of modern Uganda has produced a Uganda-centric history that put Buganda at the center of development in Uganda and neglected other societies like Bunyoro, Acholi, Busoga, and many others. So when you look at the historiography, Uganda's history begins with the Europeans in Buganda. Many early chroniclers on Uganda equate its history to the entry of European explorers like Speke, like Grant, and this points to the legitimizing presence of some form of power. However, Richard Reid critiques this assumption because the legitimizing power at that time was exogenous, which would mean that it is external force which brought history to Africa, which is not true. Africa had a history even before. Then these early chroniclers focused mostly on Buganda. The early writers on Uganda focused on Buganda, and their description influenced later studies. This had tremendous implications on how Uganda national consciousness was articulated. Early Europeans were explorers like when you look at the Baton, Speke during the 1860s, and they all focused on Buganda as a dominant kingdom in the region and neglected the other societies or didn't give much attention to other societies. This writing by these early writers, like I've said, the travelers, the missionaries, and the newly converted Christians, like the elites, the Protestants, it had implications on the development of Bunyoro. This writing that celebrated Ganda culture denigrated the culture of other societies. The description, for instance, the description of Bunyoro as savage, as lacking moral law, standards of righteousness or justice, or no thought of tribulation, like Ruth Fisher wrote. The description of Sir Tito Winyi as childlike, the definition of the Banyoro as mad and lacking civility. This justified a sort of violence that they received from the British. When I was moving around in the field, I interacted with some people and they told me that the Banyoro were looked at as mad people. And actually, the current Hoima prisons was a hospital for the mad. So they chose at that time to put a center for the mad people because they thought, or they took the Banyoro to be mad, but later it became a prison. It's being used as a prison. The historiography, this historiography was produced about these societies by early chroniclers like those I've talked about, shaped the perceptions and the attitudes, like I've already said. These and other studies on Uganda societies provided intellectual legitimacy for the political idea of indirect rule under British colonialism. When you get to history, you see how the British, when they were ruling Bunyoro, they would bring the Baganda chief because they felt their mode of administration was the best. So they put them in Bunyoro to be chiefs there. So I also continue to say that the Ganda political model celebrated as the rest were denigrated. The early chroniclers of Ganda history were highly impressed by the political sophistication of Buganda. This European impression allowed Buganda to acquire a privileged position, like I've said, as the question of historiography is a matter of social order and colonial order of knowledge was based upon perceptions surrounding the Ganda dominance in all aspects of life. These varying misconceptions and descriptions of diverse groups shaped British perceptions and attitude, and it co-opted the Ganda and at the same time marginalized the other institutions. More to this, also the economic history of, when you look at the economic history of pre-colonial societies, we find that it was reversed. In the pre-colonial societies, economic exchange took place between different places. The Baganda, the Banyaktara, the Basoga, the Alu, the Langi, the Acholi, and so on. And by then, the economic direction followed the sources and demands of the commodities. Like in Bunyoro, there was iron smithing, there was salt mining. So the Alu people from Busoga, people from Uganda could move to Bunyoro for salt, just like other tribes would come in also for horse. This stimulus was reversed when trade was centralized. One society became the central area for organizing economic relations in the colonial moment, especially when a settler class opened up shops to sell ware sourced from abroad. And these new intermediaries changed the direction of local relations towards the center. This economic reversal had a social political significance as well, since it supported the growth of ethnic and nationalism and also supported the divide and rule tactics. So when a society is denied of its means of survival, then it becomes very challenging, because once this was centralized, then like Bunyoro was denied the means of survival. And I was told in the field that mining of salt was stopped. And when the colonialists would find people mining salt for survival, they would even cut their hands off so that someone wouldn't go back to do that. So this somehow affected the people. So in sum, what I'm trying to say is that the abuse and misuse of history all these have led to a misunderstanding of the history of Bunyoro. And it has become challenging for many to understand and put into context the contemporary violence we see in Bunyoro today. I've also, and to sum up what I've said, I've argued that the contemporary challenges—
I have 2 minutes.
Okay.
2 minutes.
Thank you. I have argued that the contemporary challenges in Bunyoro speak to a particular kind of political management, which speaks to humiliate, denigrate, and hold contempt in order to core the subjects as a basis of governance that supports resource extraction and exploitation. I've also argued that this form of political management is a remnant of colonial governance, and post-independence leaders reproduced it because it allowed them to achieve a particular interest. I also continue to say that as a form of political practice, humbling political management did not arise from a vacuum, although it arose from such events as the colonial wars between Kabalega and the invading British Army. The humbling political management first emerged in intellectual writings that put Uganda's society as superior to that of other societies like Bunyoro. So I say that the Uganda-centric writing of Uganda's history praised and acknowledged Uganda's social, cultural, political beliefs and practices, while at the same time it denigrated those of other societies. However, I keep asking myself, or keep thinking, how can we expect to have a unified history of Uganda when the leaders have shown determination to divide society into so many tribes located in different homelands, so as to enable a cost-effective mode of rule? I keep thinking that we need to undertake vigorous research into how intellectual history supports political practice, and also find out how intellectualism can be channeled to support integrative and unifying political practices that accord respect to the socio-economic differences, as opposed to humbling, humiliating, and entire sections of people and regions. I think this is what I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Muhuru Zimeri Kajumba, for that fascinating presentation. And for taking us through aspects of historiography. We're aware that historiography is not static. So how it was in the pre-colonial, colonial, and the post-colonial, probably we shall be talking about that later, and how the image of Uganda remained, whether it remained the same in the post-colonial period, cut the 1960s, with Obote swearing to destroy federalism, and later, as it happens to be today, with Museveni saying, Maryland is evil. So we can figure out all these aspects into the Uganda-Bunyoro question and see where to go. Our third and last presenter today is Mr. Tunanuche Nicholas. And Nicholas, you're welcome to talk about the Bafuruchi and how their history is contested, the ethnicity is contested, and the like. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. I'm starting from. Thank you, Chair, and thank you all the colleagues, members out there for your time to come in for this presentation. My presentation tonight is on contested citizenship, a story of the Bafurchi in Chivale district since the 1990s. This is part of a bigger project of tracing a historical relationship between migrancy, nativism, and citizenship in Uganda, using study areas of southern Uganda and western Uganda. I would like to arrange my presentation along these areas: introduction, the problem, methodology, and then what I found out, and I conclude. As a way of introducing, I am stressing that this paper traces the history of migration and settlement of Bachiga into Bunyoro. One cannot really exonerate the issues of Bunyoro as some of the previous speakers have pointed out, without referring to the Bachiga, because Bafuruchi itself, etymologically traces its roots from Okfuruka, which means to migrate among the Bachiga. As it will come later on, but in this paper, I argue that due to migration, the theory and practice of citizenship has been fluid and conflictual. And therefore, I contend that the violence that took place in the post-election Chibare was rather a theoretical and contextual conflict between national and local citizenship. We recall that in 2002, there was almost a threat in terms of security in the district of Chibare, in which actually the highest seat of the local council, that is the LC5, was highly contested, and it was finally brought into order by an appointee. This, for many scholars like Jimmy Spire Sentongo and others, have referred to such a situation as a cynic conflict, which I would like to divert from this evening and emphasize that it was rather a conflict between the general national and local understanding of citizenship in the whole country. And in order to do this, I will refer to the Bafurchi, to which most of these scholars refer the ethnic conflict to be between the native Banyoro, and the Bafulchi, who are mainly Bachiga. Chivalry is comprised of so many ethnic groups, but when I went on ground in my field studies, the Bafulchi are mainly the Ugandans of Chigezi origin, and who are called the Bachiga. In fact, for them, they prefer being called Bachiga. So we cannot talk about Bafulchi as a subject without referring to Okfurka. Bafulchi, migrants as opposed to immigrants. Migrants being migration from within the territorial enclave of, say, from one region to another within the same nation state, while immigrant refers to that person who travels or migrates from outside in the line of the nation state, from the territory, say from Rwanda or Congo or Tanzania to Uganda. And by the virtue of nativity as defined by the native argument, we can possibly call it the native law of 1906, that put in place that whoever was in Uganda by that time becomes a native of Uganda. However, what is on ground, or what becomes very peculiar, is that whenever an ethnic group or a group of people comes into another area, then the original inhabitants are referred to as the natives, while others, in quotes, become foreigners. So it is in here, in this argument, that I base this paper on the Bachiga migration to point out that the settlement of the Bachiga in Bunyoro is not a new thing, but within the general framework of the migration story and peopling of the people of Uganda. I use this, I use oral history, especially the interviews that I conducted in Bunyoro, and particularly in Chibale and Kagadi districts. But more importantly, because this traces as far back as the 1940s, sorry for this technological problem. Yeah, the Bachiga migration should be understood within the context of the peopling of Uganda, and therefore as a stage or a step in vertical migration and usual migration as seen in the Bachiga traditions of, say, Abachiga Bafurukaga, meaning that the Bachiga always migrate. The Bachiga migration was in response to land. Oh yeah. So these are the waves of migrations in Uganda. The first one being that of the pre-colonial period, which can be dated back to 11th century, where we have the Bantu, the Luo, the Atekel, the Sudanic, coming to what later constituted what came to be Uganda in 1894. We also have the flight of some of the Baganda into the northern part of Nkore and in some parts of the kingdom of Igara. Some are in the present day found in North Kigezi, in the present district of Rukunjiri and the sub-county of Rushanje. The second wave was that of migrant laborers. This wave started in 1906 when the colonial government tried to modernize Uganda, modernizing Uganda in the sense of producing for cash. And so 2 zones were created. One, labor reserve, and another one, cash crop reserve zone. Labor reserve was reflecting the northern part and western part of the country, while the cash crop reserve zone was Buganda and eastern Uganda. So laborers from northern and west Nile migrated into Busoga to work in plantations.
Nicholas, you have 2 minutes.
While those of western migrated into Buganda. That reduced in 1950s, and then here comes the third wave, where we have the Bachiga migrating to Bunyoro. For reasons very clear, land and invitation from the king of Bunyoro. And of course, with the increased population and the challenges to which Kigezi was facing, mainly the water industry and soil erosion. Thus, in 1946, the colonial government, together with the local people like Ngorogoza and Chitaburaza, looked for the way of resettling the Bachiga in other areas. Of course, it was anywhere in Uganda, but they agreed to start with occupying North Kigezi, which was somewhat depopulated or with sparse population, then to Ankole, then to Toro, and finally to Bunyoro. This illustrates the invitation by Omukama, and this letter was written on 17th June 1955 rather, inviting the Bachiga, inviting them on the basis of the Ubuntu, on the basis of equal relations of the subject and you know, the leader.
Your time is over, Nicholas.
In the sense of Ugandan perspective. Okay, thank you. I would like to really mention this, and then I can go off, Mr. Chair, if allowed.
1 minute.
Okay, thank you. So the main argument then comes, this is a migration wave that took place in 1950s. And since then, the Bachiga and the Banyoro were living amicably like all others. Why do conflicts emerge in 1990s? Yet in 1992, the centralization process starts with so many posts, and the voting becomes of a year after a year. The major takeaway for this evening is that I concur with Jorgensen that there are no pure ethnic groups in the colonial sense of tribes and physiognomy of races, and that what took place in Chibare in 2002 was not ethnic conflicts, but rather a conflict of national and local citizenship exacerbated by individual interests aimed at economic endeavors. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nicola. Thank you very much, Mary, and thank you very much, Abdul. Those who were not with us right from the start, we are supposed to have 5 presenters, and unfortunately, Mimi Wineza Harriet sent an apology and has not been able to be with us. And another presenter, who is Patience Akampura, lost the dad, and we've not heard from her since then. Therefore, it is actually too late for us to continue expecting her. And we now zero onto these 3 presenters. Like I said at the start, that the issues of nationalism, ethnic identity, and politics are issues that continue to fuel scholarly interests. And the 3 presenters have tried to demonstrate that. There already a question is in the chat for Abdul, Mary, for Abdul and Mary. And as we move to the question and answer session, Abdul and Mary, perhaps you may first take a note of this, because internet went off, but I had been able to write them down for you. To Abdul, the first one came from Professor Josephina Hikire, and she says, "Great history, well done, Abdul. What should be our key takeaway?" What should be our key takeaway? Then the second came from Damba Muluelem Damba, something like that. And he says, "Would you explain to as the origin of the Nubi ethnic group. Few anthropologists confirm that Nubia ethnic groups are originally from Ethiopia. What do you say? That also goes to Abdul. Then to Mary, still we have a question from Professor Ikire and Dr. Pamela Kanakwa, who calls her question just a simple one, but it's not simple. Professor Ikire says, great proposition on historiography. Could one be right to say that either way you may need to attain objectivity? I repeat, Mary. Professor Ikire says, great proposition on historiography. Could one be right to say that either way you may need to attain objectivity? Then the second one from Dr. Pamela Kanakwa was, no doubt, Buganda was privileged in the writing of Uganda's history. He says, just a simple one. Have there been any attempts by scholars in post-independence Uganda to address the gaps? So you first take note of those, and with a set of questions that will be coming in, you'll be in position to be answering your questions or responding to those questions as we try our best to work within the time. I therefore entertain questions from our many people online. We have about 20 people online. You're free to raise up your hand and ask a question. Nicholas, there is a question for you in the chat from Dr. Spire Sentongo. Take a note. Dr. Mayende. Godfrey.
Yes, right.
I see no hand up.
But the panelists, I think, can just respond. But I also see, let me just see under the, yeah, there are some hands up. Maybe we can allow. Do you want me to allow somebody to talk like Jim Spire?
If his hand is up, please.
Okay.
Meanwhile, Nicholas, take also, there is also a question from Dr. Pamela as well in the chat.
Yes, Jimmy, I have unmuted you. I have allowed you.
All right, thanks, Chair, and thanks, Godfrey, and all the presenters. I had already typed my question for Nicholas, maybe just to re-echo it. He says that in his view, the conflict in Chihuahua is not ethnic. It seems to suggest that it's a conflict about resources and a conflict over citizenship. But there also appears to be some suggestion of mutual exclusion that oh, sorry, I just had someone in the background. Yeah, there seems to be a suggestion of mutual exclusion, that a conflict is either ethnic or about resources, but cannot be both, which made me ask what he understands to be ethnic conflict, and whether ethnic conflict has to be purely about ethnicity and nothing to do with resources or any other thing like power. Then second, Nicholas says that there are no pure tribes. But I do not, that's one of the conclusions he makes at the end, but I did not see anything alluding to that in the questions that he asked at the beginning. So what is this conclusion about? Where does it come from? Because it seems to be answering a question that is absent in his problem. But even if the question was there, what's the meaning of pure tribes? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Spire. Nicholas, let us hope you've taken note. We have 80 minutes. Any other hand, Godfrey?
There's a Josephine's hand is up.
Oh,
You can unmute. Yeah.
thank you very much. Actually, I had wanted to thank you very much. Great presentations, rich history. We are very proud as scholars. I had wanted to comment on what Spire has just commented in terms of the overall conclusion that Nanuche makes out of this very rich, nuanced history, to say that there are no pure tribes. I think this is like an othering proposition that does not serve the purpose of the study. The purpose of the study really should be enhancing our understanding of the notion of citizenship, the notion of belonging, and in the direction of, how do we deal or increase our possibilities for social cohesion. And I was asking, are there African scholars that can help us understand that? For Mary on Bunyoro, very interesting. But actually my question was that even where you're standing, is it possible that you may not attain objectivity? So you have the Buganda version, but maybe there's also a Bunyoro version. So somehow you need to contend with that issue and sort of give the reader a sense of your understanding of history and the vantage point of the writer and the historian. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Professor Josephine. And Mary, it's also a simple one. What's your take on this issue of image construction of anti-Bugandaism in as far as historiography is concerned, especially colonial historiography? We have had instances where if one speaks Luganda or Swahili, that person can be regarded as a thief. And these are issues that have continued right from the colonial times. In the Bunyoro area, if you speak Luganda, you may be regarded as that. Issues to do with image construction. What's your take on that? Abdul, you have 2 minutes to respond to the queries, and so is Nicholas and Mary. Abdul.
Thank you, Chair, and all those who are online. I appreciate the compliment from Professor Ahikire. It is really great. The question I think wanted to take home about the presentation. The take home is that the main cause for the Nubi's quest for repatriation stems from actually the integration plan of the British. So it is that the integration of the Nubi contributed towards the Nubi's quest for repatriation because they considered themselves a civilized group than other groups. I think that is what I'm trying to bring out, and that is what should be a take home. Then the other question is a little bit broad. I don't know whether the 2 minutes, by the way, it can be now one, can be enough to elaborate about the origin of the Nubia ethnic groups, and then the ones from those who originated from Ethiopia. Because if you read the current thesis now, which actually is in the library, it kind of brings a classification of the two groups. What I'm presenting currently is about the 20th century Nubi, who actually, from whom we have the Nubis of Uganda, the Nubis of Kenya. They are distinct, and that should be noted, from the Nubians of southern Egypt and northern Sudan in the 4th and 5th century. It is this group of the Nubi in southern Egypt and the Nubians of northern Sudan who are linked to the Hamitic theory, because predominantly, according to history, for them, first of all, they were agriculturists who used to settle along the Nile, and that is how they happened around the 6th century to settle along Ethiopia. And that's where that history comes from. But then they are so different, they're different from the Nubi of southern Sudan. The Nubi of southern Sudan, which I'm talking about, these are groups of people, or they are a conglomeration of various ethnicities, especially Nilotics, who came together and adopted the Nubi identity of those who came from the southern Egypt and northern Sudan. I think it is a quite comprehensive history, which I would advance. Sorry?
Within 2 minutes. You may not exhaust that within 2 minutes. Thank you. Your time is up.
It's okay. It's okay.
Mary, are you there?
Oh, yes, I am.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. I would want to say thank you to Professor Josephine Hichiri, and what you've asked challenges me to think a little more and see how to maybe be a little more objective. But what I have to say on that is what I'm trying to bring out is not to say that probably Bunyoro was underdeveloped because of Buganda, but what I want to show, or what I was aiming at showing, was that probably what was taken away from Bunyoro was given to Bunyoro, and Buganda is a victim of circumstance. And it accepted what it accepted, or the negotiation, or it accepted to collaborate because they had no option. So Buganda became a victim of circumstance. So that's what I wanted to bring out. I know Buganda could have been struggling for another question, but somehow they failed a victim of circumstance. That's what I can say about that, but I'll try to see how I can improve in my writing to make sure that it doesn't seem to be so subjective, and it comes out to be a little more objective. To Dr. Kanakwa, thank you so very much for this question. The question is, have there been any attempts by scholars in post-independence Uganda to address the gaps? I will say yes, but for now, I can't say what they've done to address the gap, but I know they are there. I've been reading some, and I'll continue to engage with them. For now, I can't give a detail on what has been done, but I know there are scholars that have tried to come in and fill the gap and explain how an integrated history of Uganda could be written in a better way that does not bring out so much of the Uganda-centric side. The last question on image construction. I'm not very sure whether I have an answer for this, but I would say image construction, I would take it as something that is stereotype, that has an origin that we need to locate probably back in the colonial period. That's what I can say for that for now. Otherwise, thank you so very much. These questions that have been asked will help me to think a little more and try to build my chapter. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. And dear presenters, keep checking in the chat. There are issues arising. For example, from Dr. Spire, he has said something again. I don't know to who, but it could be Nicholas. So Nicholas, the floor is yours to respond to the issues raised.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you those who tried to ask and interrogate my presentation. I'm very, very grateful because these questions are very pertinent to my study. The first question was from Dr. Spire about the definition of an ethnic conflict. Ethnic conflict comes from one, ethnic, and then conflict. Ethnic group are a group of people having similar identity, can I call them identifiers, like the same language, the same norms, the culture, they share same culture. And in the perspective of Bunyoro, the Banyoro and Bachiga belong to the bigger Bantu speakers, the Bantu from Congo. Therefore, a Bunyoro cannot speak, and what I think almost 80% of what a Bunyoro can speak, a Muchiga can hear, and vice versa. So migration, the migratory process also teaches us that the possibility of coming together is very high. There has been a lot of intermarriages. There has been a lot of assimilation, and to the extent that if I did not have where to start from to do the snowball, I could not identify a Munyoro from a Muchiga in the true description of the anthropologist Roscoe in the early 19th century there. Because Roscoe would say that a Munyoro is of this structure, of this face, and then Muganda would be from this structure, and also from this actually dismisses the traditional, the theoretical underpinnings of the primordialists. does ethnic conflict exclude conflicts over resources? No, but for the case of Chibare and in many parts of Uganda, the boundaries of ethnicity are so marginal that they ignite ethnic conflicts over resources, but rather individual interests which are hidden behind some sections of, can I call them elites, or some sections of people to evoke nativism for their ultimate ends. And the ultimate end is acquisition of resources, and particularly the major one, land. The meaning of the pure tribe and this one I was referring from the perspective of purity in terms of physical appearance and the rest. Then, Professor Ashchiri, African scholars who have done something on citizenship and the rest, I will start with you and then go to Mahmudan. And though not an African, but Benedict on imagined communities, he has done great in unpacking the instances and the levels of citizenship. At this time, the global world, the world is grappling with the global citizenship, where we, like now we are on the internet, or the membership to the whole world. Then here you find elites emphasizing a few elements to bring about their own small individualized demands, individual interests overriding over societal interests. Dr. Spire, that's why I really emphasized that the pure tribe, in that sense, when Uganda as a nation state is looking for national identity as a nation, trying to bring about social cohesion, political peace and security in all sectors of economy, working for the middle income status, and then conflicts of this nature become overpowered, become exacerbated into a bigger political incense, to the extent that even local units have been synthesized into different units based on marginal ethnic identities. No wonder what started with only four ethnic groups to make up Uganda in the way of the Bantu, the Atekel, and the Luo speakers, and the G. Now we have more than 56 ethnic groups. At this juncture, when people are thinking of the global citizenship debates, regional integration, but now I think it is a way to go for Uganda to embrace peace and unity through discarding and unlearning some bad elements of identity identifiers to, or in any case, use this bad history to bring us together. This also gives me an opportunity to understand Dr. Pamela's question, but the biggest part of Dr. Pamela's question was informative, and it ignites my thinking much more on the key drivers of these conflicts and the people arguing and fighting over some specific resources. But also within my thinking, the general question,
Nicholas, you can summarize?
Which has perturbed me so much, is why where does the conflict that is seemingly ethnic prop up after 1990s, when in actual sense they were foolish question, the Furka, the migration process started a long time ago. Those and so many questions, of course, keep coming, and I get more questions than the answers. But the two notions of national citizenship and local citizenship remain major diversionaries, to which, in my view, local should feed in national. Local, by definition, or in my understanding, being membership bestowed upon being a member of a particular community within that country, in terms of language, in terms of the culture, in terms of way of dressing, eating, and so on, eating adequacies. National, okay, becoming the whole of Uganda, the whole country.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. You may not have to respond to all. Regard some as take home, but in the chat there is a lot for you. Dr. William Tayeba, you had something to say. I can see you have posted something in the chat, but it's not Clear. Dr. William Tayewa?
Thanks very much, Chair. I think the comment I was making to Nicholas was that when he talks about nativism in that region, we should not forget that there are instances where the head of state himself has really not made things easy. And I have cited 2 cases. His intervention in 2002 to force a duly elected Muchiga to step down for a so-called indigenous candidate. And then in 2009, where the head of state proposed that several elective positions at local government level, including for parliament, be ring-fenced for indigenous Banyoro. So I find those kind of things, policies coming from our head of state, very disturbing. That is the comment I made. Thanks very much, Chair, for giving me an opportunity.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tayewa. Godfrey?
Yes, Zaid.
Is there any other hand up in the last 1.5 minutes that we do have?
No hand up now.
Okay, thank you very much, members, for attending this session. And thanks for all your contributions towards the presenters in one way or the other. At least you have aided their studies. Dr. Pamela, thank you very much. Professor Hichire, thank you very much. Dr. Kanakwa, there is nothing like a simple question. Just a simple one. In fact, it has not been a simple one, I guess, and it will never be. But thank you very much for everything. Thank you, members. I hand you back over to Godfrey in a transition to the next session.
Thank you, Zaid. You have done a very good job. I have been enjoying history here and all the arguments, and sometimes I would get confused, but you have done a very great job. We are ending at this point, and then so that we can be able to start the upcoming sessions. Please enjoy your day, and please join the next sessions that are starting soon. Thank you. I can now end the session.